you just heard was part of the trailer for Born to be Wild, an upcoming documentary about our next guest's quest to save the endangered orangutan. Dr. Birute Galdikas is the world's foremost authority on orangutans and was chosen by Dr. Louis Leakey himself to study them in 1971. Since then, she helped establish Tanjung Pudding, a 1 million-acre national park on the south coast of the world's third largest tropical rainforest in Borneo. This is where she's conducted the longest continuous study by one investigator of any wild animal in the world. Please welcome Dr. Birute Galdikas to LiveWire. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you.
That was actually, the Born to be Wild is an IMAX 3D documentary, and it was narrated by Morgan Freeman, who I think narrates everything now.
That's right, including the voice of God.
Yes, exactly. He's the voice of God. And can you talk, I know that you have a foundation to save these orangutans, and that's one of the focuses of this documentary. Can you talk about what we'll see in it?
Well, actually, what you'll see is the work that our foundation, which is Orangutan Foundation International, supports and has been supporting for several decades, and that is the rehabilitation of wild-born ex-captive orangutans. And it's not meant to be a comedy, it's meant to be very serious, but, you know, orangutans just are amazing creatures who don't take themselves seriously. You know, the author who was on just before me spoke about Buddhism, and orangutans are the only great apes who are found in Asia, and they have a kind of a contemplative serenity that the other great apes don't have, that is kind of very Buddhist, very like. But they also have a sense of humor, and the documentary is actually amazing. It's funny. It brings a smile or even a chuckle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then the other part of the movie, I have to say, is about the work of a woman named Daphne Sheldrick, and she has been rehabilitating elephants, just like I have been rehabilitating orangutans, and that portion of the documentary is also amazing.
It's absolutely beautiful. If you get a chance, just go on YouTube and you can find the trailer for it, and it's stunning. I wanted to talk a little bit about, you were talking about all of these aspects of orangutans it sounds very human, and I know that out of the great, at least I read that out of the great apes, genetically they're the furthest from us.
That's right.
But it sounds to me like they're the closest to us in the way that in their behavior.
Well, you know, chimpanzees share 99% of their genetic material with us. There are actually people who have received blood transfusions from chimpanzees. And you can do that once the blood groups are matched. Orangutans share about 97% of their genetic material with us. And they are human enough that they resemble us, but they're distant enough that they are, in some ways, very, very different. So one of the ways in which they're different, which has just come out in the last few months, is among all large mammals, they use virtually no energy. So an orangutan moving through the canopy uses less energy than a person sitting in a chair, in an easy chair, watching TV. And
how does that work physically?
Well, I'm not a physiologist, but there's something about their metabolism, something about their physiology, and something about their behavior. I mean, an orangutan won't do anything unless he or she wants to do it. And he or she really wants to do it badly. Mm-hmm. You know, they don't just come for treats, for instance.
Right.
Yeah. So it's this kind of conservation of energy that makes them very contemplative and meditative. And they're very benign. They are not aggressive. The only time that you really have to fear an orangutan's wrath or anger is when an adult male comes close to another adult male in the presence of a receptive female. So they kind of basically sit in the forest, eat relatively little, but when it really counts, then they get very, very serious.
Well, and I did read a passage in your book Reflections in Eden?
Of Eden,
Of
yes.
Eden. About a mother who was protecting her child against a man.
Male, yes.
Yeah, well, it was a person, it wasn't
Oh,
a
person.
male orangutan.
Right.
But she was very receptive to you. And you talk in your book about how you have gotten emotionally involved with these orangutans. And I know that some scientists actually believe that that's kind of verboten. But what do you believe that you've learned about them that you couldn't have learned had you not become emotionally involved with them?
Well, I think I've learned very simple things, but sometimes the simplest things are the most profound truths. And what I have learned is that I'm a human being, and that human beings are basically very different from orangutans in that we humans very badly need each other. I mean, orangutans are like God. They absolutely do not need anybody else. They're totally self-sufficient. They are universes in themselves. They are the only higher primate or the only great ape that is solitary or semi-solitary in the wild. So when you see an adult male in a zoo and he's all by himself, people say, poor creature, poor creature. Well, if he was a chimpanzee, yes, that would be torture. That would be abuse, keeping him by himself. But an orangutan has a self-sufficiency. And so what I've learned from orangutans is that human beings don't have that self-sufficiency. Without kin, without friendship, we are lost. We are doomed. And this seems to be like a very simple truth, but it's actually extremely profound and goes back to how we evolved as a species. We need each other. And of course, there's all kinds of data that show, that older people who are socially isolated are the ones who most readily get heart attacks. And it might seem like a very simple truth, but it's so profound when you take it to the depths of its meaning.
How do you, having been around them for so long, do you in a way feel like part of their family? I mean, do you feel like in some way you've become attached in ways that they can't become attached?
That's a very hard question to answer. But I think for orangutans, friendship is a very rare commodity, but because it is rare, when they do get attached, they really do get attached. And they're kind of like, I want to say they have primary relationships. And, I had a friend who studied chimpanzees, and she said that, these were captive chimpanzees, that every day, she'd go to those captive chimpanzees, and the first question that they asked was, who is dominant today? Well, with orangutans, you can have a friendship with an orangutan that spans decades, and they never ask that question once you become friends with them. It no longer matters who is dominant and who isn't. So I have very deep friendships with orangutans, and I think I've worked with them now 40 years.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I think a piece of orangutan has entered my soul,
Well, they're beautiful creatures. I think it would be difficult not to have that happen.
Well, they're very benign. They're very benevolent. And the serenity that I speak of, is into the core of their souls.
May have rubbed off on you.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
I hope so. I hope so.
And you probably get asked this question a lot, but I find it really interesting that Louis Leakey chose, you are one of, they call you Leakey's angels. It's Jane Goodall, Diane Fossey, and you are all studied with Louis Leakey, and each one of you worked with him. And some people talk about the ways in which that you decided to study them, and that was that you sort of allowed the subjects to have control. And people have written in the past about how a man would probably be less likely to do that. And Diane Fossey and you and Jane Goodall have all been extremely successful in this research. So do you feel that your gender in some way has made you better at this work?
Well, as a Western person, there are data that indicate that Western women, are more perceptive in some ways than Western men. Now, I don't know if this is, international but I haven't always found this to be the case. My first husband, Rod Brindamore, was extremely perceptive and actually quite macho too. But certainly, I think that women's concerns in society, certainly 40 years ago, were not about career, were not about advancement in academia. So when Jane Goodall went out to study chimpanzees 50 years ago, and she's celebrating 50 years of the chimpanzees this year, she went out with the aim of actually studying them, learning about them. She had no ambitions to get a PhD, or become a full professor or a dean or anything like that. And I think 40 years ago, that was the case, that for the women who went out to study primates, it was about the primates, it wasn't about themselves. So I think that's why Louis Leakey, he didn't really choose us, we chose ourselves.
Well, I know you actually had to convince him to send you.
That's right. And so did Dan Fossey, actually. Jane Goodall actually was his assistant, his secretary, and he did choose her, although she obviously had to convince him of her stellar qualities in terms of perception. So,
just as a final question, I know that you're doing work with this foundation to help with the endangered orangutans.
Yes.
What can people do? Where can they go to find out more about what's going on with them and how they can help?
Okay, there's two things that people can do right now. One of them is just go to our website, which is orangutan.org. But the second thing that they can do is they can choose not to buy or eat anything that has palm oil in it.
Right.
I mean, I tell the palm oil plantation managers, I tell them in Indonesia, I say, you have orangutan blood on your hands.
Because they're cutting down the trees that are where these orangutans live.
Yes, the habitat destruction, the millions of hectares of tropical rainforest that have been destroyed in Borneo is what is causing orangutans to go extinct in the wild. 80% of the habitat is gone, and probably 80% of orangutans are now gone as well in terms of population numbers. In Sumatra, we have, and there's one species of orangutan, the Sumatran orangutan, something like 6,500 orangutans left, which is virtually nothing.
Yeah.
In Borneo, which is a larger island, third largest island as you mentioned, we have 40,000 orangutans left, which is also, you spread it in an area, that population, the size of Nevada and California put together, you're dealing with a very fragmented population,
right.
Populations, yeah.
Well, that seems like a simple thing that people can do, an easy choice to make.
Yeah, I do it. And actually, I stopped eating palm oil. I checked the labels, assiduously.
So just check the labels of your food and make sure it's not in there.
Yeah, obsessively.
Great.
And palm oil, it has anything that has the word palm in it, you know what it is. It's not that good for your health anyways.
Yeah.
It isn't. I actually lost weight, a little bit of weight after
Great.
I stopped eating palm oil, yeah.
Well, the documentary is Born to be Wild. It'll be out in April of 2011. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Birute Galdikas.